Let's talk about caregiving. Hey everybody, I'm Amber, a disabled gal here to reveal or remind you that you're complete in Jesus Christ alone. Alright, so caregiving. I have noticed that strangers have a habit of judging disabled people in their choice of caregivers. They will act as if disabled people are irresponsible if they choose not to have outside caregivers. By outside caregivers, I mean ones that are, outside the home. They do not live with the individual. So let's talk about reality for a moment here. I would say the majority of disabled people do not have a stack of resumes sitting somewhere of qualified caregivers that they can just call up and interview at any moment. It's hard to even find not qualified caregivers, let alone qualified ones. Like many times, we as disabled people are actually settling for caregivers who are not a good fit for us. And that is because the just lack of caregivers. I will link some resources below explaining that there is an actual caregiver crisis going on right now due to caregiver shortages. So that reason alone right there makes it not even realistic to expect every disabled person to just have this, team of caregivers available to them. Disabled people that are fortunate enough to have a team of caregivers, they are very blessed to have that because that's not common. It seems to me that a lot of people think that caregivers just fall out of the sky. That if you're disabled, you just kind of automatically have all these caregivers and all your needs are just kind of magically met. That is far, far, far from reality. Not only finding caregivers, but also qualifying for hours. In the United States, your income and or your assets have to be below a certain amount to even remain eligible for caregiver services. It does vary state by state on what exactly those amounts are, but I really haven't seen one that actually allows for full financial freedom. Some are more reasonable than others, but it's kind of like, the lesser of evils. As a disabled person, not only do you have to think about, your medical needs, but you also have to think about, is my bank account too high, to keep my disability services that most people couldn't afford anyway? Not only that aspect, but you also have to constantly convince these government bureaucrat caseworkers that you're disabled enough to need these hours. It's a constant fight with that. And a lot of states just straight up won't offer 24-hour care unless you live in a facility. Now, I do know that there are people who either do qualify for 24-hour care or they are able to afford it out of pocket. For some of these people, having outside caregivers just works the best. Or even if they don't have 24-hour care, they have enough care to get their needs met. I will say that just based on my observation, I do think that this is an exception, and most people, this is just not reality. This isn't really attainable, even if somebody wants to have outside caregivers. I also want to point out that for some, having outside caregivers is ideal. Maybe they live on their own and, there's nobody there to be their caregiver. So obviously they're going to need outside caregivers in that case. Or maybe they do live with friends or even family members. And in some instances, it is just better for the relationship to outsource the caregiving. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with that, and I don't think people should feel ashamed of that. Whatever works best for the individuals, that's what they should do. However, I'm just pointing out here that doesn't work for everybody. I think sometimes people forget that disabled people are people. We are individuals. What works for one person isn't going to work for another, or even different individual relationships are different. I have relationships that are better when caregiving is not involved. On the flip side, Devin and I's relationship, I think caregiving actually adds intimacy to our relationship. Now I'm going to give some reasons why some people might find it actually more stressful to have outside caregivers. These reasons are in no particular order, but number one, it makes scheduling and managing routines more difficult. For example, if you have someone scheduled to come help you get out of bed in the morning, you need to get out of bed, when they are scheduled. Or same thing for going to bed or eating lunch or even bathroom breaks. Everything is just on a very rigid schedule, when you have outside caregivers. And also just trying to coordinate with another person, or in many cases, multiple different people, that, can feel like a full-time job in and of itself. I mean, think about it. In companies, we have HR to do that. With disabled people, we are the HR, The second point is also kind of HR related. You have to be prepared for caregivers to quit without notice or to not show up for shifts without notice. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon for caregivers to ghost people. If you're not familiar with that term, ghosting, can apply to not only dating relationships, but also caregiver relationships. So one day they just might suddenly stop showing up and just kind of fall off the face of the planet and not respond. Or they might not communicate with you about, hey, I'm not showing up to my shift tonight, and then you're just kind of stuck in whatever situation you're in. Maybe you're ready to go to bed and your night person is about to show up to help you and they just don't. Well, now you're just kind of stuck in your wheelchair. So that can be not pleasant. Another aspect is training new employees. Sometimes this is easier than others, but it does kind of depend on the person. Believe it or not, some caregivers, it takes a long time for them to learn how to wipe you properly, for example. If you have a caregiver that's not the easiest to train, this can increase the risk of injury, infection, sicknesses, just, hospitalization even. The list goes on. The next thing is personality. Those people in life that you just kind of tolerate, but you don't necessarily like them? Imagine if those people needed to help you do very intimate things, such as using the restroom, getting dressed, showering. So not only is job performance something to keep in mind, but personality. If the personality isn't clicking, it's not going to be a good experience for either person. I know personally in the past, this has actually caused some depression with me when I had caregivers that our personalities just were not meshing. Next is a lack of privacy. Constantly having somebody in your home, in your private spaces, doing these very private things for you, it can just get a little bit tiring. Especially on the days where, you're just having kind of an off day and you still have this person that's just there. The last thing that I have listed is, for many of these people, it is just a job to them. I know there are caregivers that really are passionate about what they do, but then there are plenty of them that it is just a paycheck. They really do not care about the actual well-being of the individual. And again, I'm not saying that that's all of them, but I have definitely experienced it. I'm sure there's other points, but that's the main ones that I could think of Now I'm going to move on to support for family caregivers. So our society and even our government definitely frowns upon family caregivers, specifically parents and spouses, being compensated. You'll hear terms like legally responsible, and essentially the notion is, well, they are in this role, they're a parent or a spouse, so they're expected to do that anyway. As a person who actually experiences caregiving on a daily basis, I just want to say that is some rationalization there, and it comes from not putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. Or in my case, not putting yourself in my wheels. See what I did there? Pretty punny, right? I believe that families affected by disability should have freedom and autonomy over the choice of the individual's care. If the disabled individual is able to make decisions for themselves, I believe that they should have the autonomy to say who their caregiver is, and if they want that to be their spouse or their parent, a government entity shouldn't be able to tell them no. For many families, this just makes sense and it works the best. So I gave some reasons why some people might be uncomfortable with outside caregivers. Now I'm going to give some reasons why parents and spouses often makes the most sense. So parents and spouses are the least likely to make those mistakes that I was talking about. Because they are less likely to make mistakes, this means that there's less infections, there's less sicknesses, there's less hospitalizations. Overall, just better health and well-being for the disabled individual. They are also the most likely to be reliable and not commit fraud. What people don't think about is when family caregivers are not compensated, that means that they're going to need other employment. When they go to their other employment, that leaves the disabled individual without care. And as I said earlier, there is a caregiver crisis, so it's not always possible to find other caregivers. And even if you find other caregivers, are they going to actually meet the needs of the individual? Are they going to show up? Are they going to be reliable? And let's talk about the family caregiver for a moment. Caregiving is not a standard 40-hour-a-week job. That's not how the human body works. Caregiving, you're essentially on call 24/7. That's 128 more hours per week than a standard full-time job. So having employment on top of being the caregiver, that's just a lot of energy. I'm not trying to say that the disabled person should feel guilty or anything, but I'm trying to say we need to stop treating these family caregivers like they are a superhuman. And also, we need to stop treating the disabled individual like their needs don't matter, like, oh, while their caregiver is at work, they should either just have to fend for themselves or hope that their unreliable caregiver actually shows up. It's often better for both parties to just support compensating family caregivers. It's a egregious oversimplification to just say, well, they're a parent or a spouse, so they're responsible anyway. You're not taking into consideration what I've just explained. And certainly, random busybody, nosy strangers shouldn't judge disabled people in their choice of caregivers. Now, obviously, this doesn't mean you can't report suspected abuse or anything like that, but I'm talking about, being like, oh, this person doesn't have 7, outside caregivers. Oh, that's the kind of things I'm talking about. On a more positive note, there's a gentleman named Nathan Hill. He's the father of a child with disabilities. He's making some really good advocacy effort to try to get Congress's attention on why compensating family caregivers is so critical. I fully support what he is doing, and I will link his YouTube channel below. At the end of the day, please remember, like I said, disabled people are people. We're not objects. We all have our own certain wants, needs, desires. We are just human beings. Sometimes having strangers be our caregiver is just not safe or practical. It does work for some, but please don't shove all of us into a box. From a Christian perspective, we are image bearers of God, and therefore we should be treated with dignity. And as vulnerable image bearers of God, we shouldn't be limited in our opportunities for getting our needs met. Giving us the opportunity to have our needs met in the most safe and dignified way possible is what every Christian should be supporting. If you watched this far, thank you so much for hearing me out, and a huge thank you to my supporters. You guys really do bless this channel tremendously, and God bless you all.
The video you just saw was made by fallible Christians.
Although we diligently seek to represent the God of the Bible accurately, please understand that we are still being sanctified.
For absolute truth, please refer to the Bible.